In a world scrambling to redefine global relationships, one powerful phrase is cutting through the noise and fundamentally reshaping America's future. America first. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into an agenda that's not just making headlines, but sending tremors through the global economy and sparking significant shifts right here at home. Just months into 2025, the America First philosophy has roared back. President Trump swiftly reintroduced universal 10% tariffs on all U.S. imports. And these aren't minor adjustments. I mean, we're seeing substantial duties like 54% on Chinese goods, 20% on the European Union, even 25% on products from India. The stated goal: to ensure America is no longer a sucker, to aggressively protect American industries, reassert our manufacturing independence, and make certain we make things here, buy things here, and protect jobs here. This isn't just rhetoric, it's a bold reorientation of American leadership. It's backed by institutions like the America First Policy Institute. They've seen, over 86% of their drafted policies advanced or enacted in the first 100 days. That's huge. But with China calling these tariffs an act of economic hostility and global allies considering, coordinated retaliation, the world is bracing for the far-reaching consequences. What's truly at stake here, and what does it mean for you, our listener?
What's truly fascinating, I think, is how quickly and comprehensively these broad policy strokes have moved from concept to concrete action. It signals a very clear, decisive redefinition of American priorities, emphasizing domestic interests above all else, both at home and abroad. It's an approach rooted in the conviction that, previous global entanglements often disadvantaged the U.S.
That rapid movement is precisely why we need to unpack this. Let's start with the economic policies driving this agenda, specifically on trade and tariffs, because these are having immediate, tangible effects. The America First economic philosophy, it's rooted in prioritizing U.S. interests above all other nations, often leads to policies of non-interventionism, American nationalism, and protectionist trade. We heard President Trump declare back in February 2025 that America will no longer be a sucker. We will make things here, buy things here, and protect jobs here. This really signals a clear move away from multilateral trade agreements, kind of sidelining organizations like the World Trade Organization, the WTO, in favor of bilateral deals. What's the administration's core argument for why the WTO framework and multilateralism in general has failed them?
Well, the administration's view, as reflected in our sources, is that multilateral agreements and global institutions often bound the U.S. to rules that didn't really serve its best interest. The argument is they allowed other nations to sort of cheat or benefit disproportionately. The core thinking is that these frameworks eroded American manufacturing, sent jobs overseas. So by stepping back from them, the U.S. can negotiate directly, wielding its economic power to secure deals that are explicitly more favorable for American industries and workers. It's about reclaiming economic agency.
And the implementation has been swift and, far-reaching. April 4th, 2025, President Trump announced what he called reciprocal tariffs, starting with a base 10% on all trading partners. But for some countries, those numbers jump significantly. I mean, we're talking 54% on goods from China, 46% on Vietnam, 37% on Bangladesh, 29% Pakistan, 26% India, 24% Japan, and 20% on the EU. And beyond that, a sweeping executive order has slapped even higher duties on specific nations, like 35% on Canadian goods, 50% on Brazilian exports, 20% on Taiwanese products, and 39% on imports from Switzerland. What's the deeper rationale for such a broad and aggressive tariff regime beyond just protecting American industry?
Well, beyond protecting industry, the administration's stated goals for these tariffs are punitive, to explicitly punish what it views as cheating trade partners, and to fundamentally reassert U.S. manufacturing independence. The idea is to make imported goods so expensive that companies are, compelled to bring production back to American soil. Creates jobs, boosts domestic supply chains. This approach also aims to reduce reliance on foreign nations for critical goods, which is framed as a key tenet of national security through economic self-sufficiency. Historically, these kinds of policies aimed at punishing cheaters have often had mixed results, sometimes leading to retaliatory cycles that hurt domestic consumers more than foreign producers. The insight here is really the unilateral aggression and sheer breadth of these tariffs. It signals a move far beyond targeted trade disputes towards a fundamental redrawing of global economic relationships. It forces other nations to reevaluate their entire supply chain architecture.
These are truly unprecedented levels for many of these tariffs. So with such significant duties now in place, what are the first indicators we're seeing regarding their impact on the domestic economy? When you put tariffs on imports, that means higher costs at home, right?
That's precisely what's being reported.
Hmm.
Studies indicate a definite increase in prices and inflation for U.S. consumers. For instance, in June alone, prices for home furnishings and durable household items jumped 1.3%. That's the largest increase since March 2022. Recreational goods and vehicles climbed 2.9%, and even clothing and footwear saw a 0.4% hike. This directly impacts household budgets, making everyday goods more expensive for you, the consumer.
So it's not just abstract economic policy, it's hitting people's wallets pretty directly.
Absolutely. And beyond consumer prices, these tariffs have also significantly disrupted global supply chains. Consider the American auto industry, for example. It's feeling higher costs because it relies on international components, many of which now face these new duties. One electric vehicle company, according to our sources, even halted production entirely. Why? Delays in battery imports from South Korea and Taiwan caught up in this new tariff bureaucracy. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has warned tariffs are likely to generate a rise in inflation, a slowdown in economic growth, and an increase in unemployment. This raises the real risk of stagflation.
Stagflation, that's a term we hear sometimes, but can you clarify what Chair Powell's warning truly means for the average American? Like, what does that feel like?
Yet, Chair Powell's warning about stagflation is particularly concerning because it means we could face the worst of both worlds. You get rising inflation, which means your money buys less, combined with a stagnant economy, so little to no job growth. This could also lead to an increase in unemployment. It's a very different and much more difficult economic challenge than just inflation or recession alone. Goldman Sachs has even estimated a 2% rise in consumer prices over 18 months because of these tariffs and put a 45% chance on a U.S. recession.
Wow. Those domestic economic tremors are undeniable, but these tariffs don't just stay within our borders, do they? What's been the immediate ripple effect on international relations? How are other countries reacting to this decisive America First stance?
Internationally, the reactions are quite strong and largely negative. China, for example, has called Trump's tariffs an act of economic hostility. They swiftly retaliated with their own tariff hikes on American soybeans, aircraft, and importantly, rare earth elements. We're also seeing countries like the European Union, Canada, and Japan not just reacting individually, but actually considering coordinated tariffs against what they see as U.S. unilateralism. This is about more than just trade disputes. It's really a reevaluation of global alliances.
So it's not just bilateral skirmishes, but the potential for larger blocs forming in opposition to U.S. policy that could really reshape things.
Exactly. This situation has fostered a significant sense of distrust. Doubts about America's intentions, its trustworthiness, arising in a way not seen in, well, over half a century. One analyst noted that the rhetoric, the America first, come kiss my ass kind of talk, would likely accelerate efforts by other nations to reduce their economic exposure to the U.S. These policies are definitely accelerating trends towards deglobalization. Other nations are actively seeking new trade blocs, potentially shifting global trade away from the U.S. entirely. Japan, for instance, intends to resist any U.S. effort to align it against China. They cite the critical importance of their long-standing trade ties with Beijing.
And what about the U.S. financial system in all of this? I mean, how is it holding up under the pressure?
It's seen significant volatility. U.S. Treasury bonds, traditionally a safe haven, have been trading like the debt of an emerging market country because of the uncertainty. And the dollar has plunged against other major currencies. This global uncertainty is clearly impacting investor confidence and financial stability at home. It's also worth noting, kind of interesting side effect, that the America First policy has even become a subject of international satire, reflects a broader sentiment of bewilderment and concern, really.
International satire, that's quite a reaction. What kind of sentiments is that reflecting? Can you give us a sense of what that looks like?
It usually manifests as, cartoons or maybe comedic skits from foreign media outlets, often depicting Uncle Sam with blinders on or maybe caricaturing the U.S. withdrawing into some kind of fortress. It reflects a sentiment that America is acting against its own long-term interests, alienating its allies, sometimes seen as a retreat from global leadership. It's a way for other nations to express their disapproval, their frustration, without direct diplomatic confrontation.
Okay, so while the economic and trade policies grab headlines, the America First agenda is equally transformative on the home front, particularly in how it aims to reshape government itself and the balance of executive power. This is where the America First Policy Institute, or AFPI, plays a massive role. This conservative think tank, founded in 2021. It was described as a White House in waiting before President Trump's second term. And within the first 100 days, over 86%. 86% of its drafted policies were advanced or enacted. That's a huge success rate.
That figure alone speaks volumes about the significant influence AFPI has had on the administration's agenda. One of their key proposals involves drastically reducing federal bureaucracy. How? By eliminating most civil service protections for federal employees, allowing for summary dismissal without appeal. This aligns directly with Executive Order 13957 from 2020, which created what's known as Schedule F. This move aims to strip job protections from tens of thousands of career civil servants, a measure Trump allies intend to revive and expand.
So Schedule F essentially reclassifies government employees. What's the stated goal of this, and what are the potential consequences critics are highlighting?
Right. Schedule F essentially reclassifies thousands of federal employees, stripping away those job protections that typically require a lengthy process for dismissal. Supporters argue this ensures a more responsive, more aligned bureaucracy, meaning federal workers are more accountable to the elected president's agenda. Critics, on the other hand, warn it risks politicizing the civil service. They suggest it could undermine expertise, lead to a kind of spoil system where loyalty trumps competence, and that could diminish the nonpartisan function of government agencies, ultimately impacting the quality and stability of public services for everyone.
This sounds like a direct effort to ensure the federal government is aligned with the president's vision. And we're seeing some pretty bold moves on executive authority, too. For example, the administration has moved to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, through an executive order. This involved a 90-day freeze on foreign aid and an announcement to integrate USAID into the State Department, all without new legislation from Congress. That seems significant.
This specific action raises serious constitutional concerns. It's been described as a constitutionally suspect sleight of hand that bypasses Congress and its Article 1 powers over the budget. Legal scholars argue presidents cannot unilaterally eliminate entities established by law without new legislation. For those less familiar with its importance, Justice Robert Jackson's framework from Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer back in 1952 is highly relevant here. He famously outlined three zones of presidential power: acting with congressional approval, acting when Congress is silent, and acting against Congress's express will. When a president acts in that zone of twilight where Congress is silent, as it seems to be with the U.S. side here, his powers is ambiguous. The insight here is that congressional inaction isn't just passive. It can be interpreted as de facto empowerment. It could set a dangerous precedent for future administrations to circumvent legislative authority, potentially consolidating power through inertia.
So, in essence, congressional silence could empower future administrations to do the same with other agencies, profoundly impacting the system of checks and balances. What about budgetary priorities under this framework?
Well, the 2018 federal budget proposal, titled Make America Great Again and America First, clearly aimed to balance the budget in 10 years. That's a significant fiscal goal. It proposed increased spending for the military, homeland security, and veteran care, while simultaneously cutting foreign aid. This explicitly demonstrates a prioritization of domestic security and defense over international expenditures, aligning perfectly with the America First ethos.
Okay, moving to healthcare. This administration is also pushing significant reforms. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act aims to cut Medicaid spending by an estimated $793 billion, primarily through stricter work requirements. This would mean childless adults without disabilities would need to prove they're working, volunteering, or attending school to remain eligible for Medicaid.
This is a substantial change. It's projected to result in an estimated 7.8 million Americans losing Medicaid eligibility. And it's important to understand why this number is so high. Experts anticipate many will lose coverage not because they aren't employed, but because of logistical challenges in reporting their status. Navigating complex bureaucratic systems, maybe having unstable work hours. For context, 44% of American adults currently on Medicaid already work full-time. Of the remaining 56% not working full-time, 20% work part-time, 12% are caregivers, 10% are ill or injured, and 7% are students. So it hits a lot of different groups. This policy perpetuates a uniquely American approach linking healthcare access to employment. Unlike most other industrialized countries where healthcare is often seen as a universal right, separate from employment status.
AFPI also outlines other key policy positions that touch on various aspects of American life. Quickly, on energy, they advocate for expanding domestic oil and gas production, resuming the Keystone Pipeline, emphasizing energy independence. On social issues, they propose supervised ultrasound requirements, mandatory waiting periods before abortions, ending federal funding for organizations like Planned Parenthood. They also firmly oppose red flag gun laws and support nationwide reciprocity for concealed carry permits, allowing permits from one state to be recognized across all others. And finally, a core tenet is restricting immigration, completing the border wall, boosting funding for border agents, and ending legal immigration programs like family-based visas and the visa lottery, all prioritizing national borders and national sovereignty.
Right. And if we connect all of this to the broader philosophical implications, America First marks a radical philosophical shift in American leadership. It's moving from a philosophy of consensus and partnership towards one of, well, confrontation and pressure. At its heart is a conviction that multilateralism has simply failed to serve American interests. This leads to a strong push towards deglobalization, prioritizing domestic manufacturing, and ultimately self-reliance. It's a profound skepticism of interdependence itself.
It seems America First isn't just a set of policies, but a complete philosophical reorientation. Can you trace the historical roots of this conviction that multilateralism has failed? Is this simply a return to an older form of American nationalism, or does it represent something entirely new?
Yeah, the notion of America First definitely has historical echoes, particularly with isolationist sentiments post-World War I, when many argued against getting entangled in European affairs. However, this iteration feels distinct. It's not merely withdrawing from global structures, it's actively dismantling them, challenging their legitimacy. The core insight, I think, is a profound skepticism of interdependence itself, viewing it as a vulnerability rather than a strength. This is a radical departure from the post-World War II consensus, which emphasized international cooperation and institution building as vital for peace and prosperity. This current philosophy champions a return to national sovereignty and economic independence, believing it's the most reliable path to security and prosperity for the U.S.
This philosophical shift raises a crucial debate, often framed as America alone. Critics argue that this approach risks higher consumer prices, slower innovation, fractured international relationships, potentially isolating the U.S. But what's the counter-argument from supporters, beyond just protecting jobs?
Supporters view this economic nationalism as a necessary way to reclaim national agency, protect domestic jobs, and ensure national security. They argue that true strength comes from self-reliance and that prioritizing American workers and industries is essential for long-term national vitality. They might also argue that by putting America first, the U.S. becomes a stronger, maybe more reliable partner in the long run once its own house is in order. However, the future of the global order remains highly uncertain. As the U.S. imposes barriers, potentially withdraws from global networks, other nations like China and the European Union are already actively establishing new trade blocs, deepening their own ties. This could ultimately shift the center of global trade and influence away from the U.S., which raises fundamental questions about the trustworthiness and reliability of the U.S. as an international partner in the long run.
We've just taken a deep dive into the America First agenda, from its bold economic tariffs to its ambitious domestic reforms and the constitutional questions it raises. You've heard how it's designed to prioritize American jobs and industry and the international friction it generates. Now, consider this. In a globalized world, if America chooses to go first, is it building a stronger foundation for itself by emphasizing self-reliance and national sovereignty? Or is it merely building walls that could, in the long run, leave it isolated and perhaps weaker on the world stage? What balance of self-reliance and global engagement truly secures America's future prosperity and influence for you and generations to come?